Welcome aboard Tortuga. It's Sunday, September 20th, 2020. I'm Todd Dunn, and today is a sad day. Why? Because 2 weeks from tomorrow, Tortuga is going to be laid up for the winter, and the season will be over. It was a short season this year because I had more work to do on the boat in the spring than normal. And I didn't actually get in the water until early July, so 3 months. So anyway, end of the season. Lay up for the winter. Why? Why would I want to do that? Well, there are two reasons. The first is bureaucratic. My insurance company requires that the boat be laid up from the 1st of November until the end of March. So basically, I can't use the boat in the winter unless I want to pay a really hefty extra charge for insurance. So that's a big factor. And the other one is Mother Nature, the weather. It, believe it or not, gets cold here in Maine. And we frequently here on Mount Desert Island can have temperatures around 15 degrees or so. And it can go below zero even. I think it's been to -4 since I moved here. In addition to being cold, we have wind. In the winter here in Maine, we have our worst storms, nor'easters. They can last 4 or 5 days and have winds of 40 to 60 knots. And they're often accompanied by snow, sometimes a lot of snow. So that makes boating in winter a pretty tough deal. And basically, no one really boats here in the winter unless they have to. So those are the reasons that we lay the boat up for the winter. So what does lay up mean? Well, it means that the boat is winterized and you don't use it for the winter. There are 2 ways you can lay your boat up. You can do in the water layup, or you can haul the boat out and store it on land. If you lay your boat up in the water, there are 2 ways you can do that. If you have your own mooring, you can hang the boat on the mooring and just leave it there for the winter. The boat on a mooring will be subject to whatever weather comes into the harbor you're in, and if your harbor isn't well protected, the boat can get pretty beat up by weather. And if you don't have good solid cleats and a solid mooring with good lines, you could potentially come off your mooring, and that's never good, and the boat could go aground. The other in the water layup is to come to a place like this marina here and tie the boat up at the marina. Tie it off, bow, stern, and midships, probably with doubled up lines, and that has some pluses. If it's at the marina, you can come down to the marina and walk out to the boat. You might find the docks a little covered with snow and ice. It might be a little treacherous at times, but you can come down and you can check on the boat. You can remove snow and ice from the boat and all that. And you could even sit on it in the evening if you wanted, or on a nice day. We do get some nice sunny days in the winter where it warms up, to the middle 30s. And in a boat like this, in a cabin with all these windows, it could be quite pleasant on a nice sunny day with a temperature of 35 or so. So those are the options. What are for in the water storage? What about haul out and storage on land? Well, there you really have sort of 3 options. If you're fortunate and you can find somebody to do it, you can take the boat home and store it at home. Now for most of us, that means the boat's going to be on stands in the yard, in your driveway, and that can be very good because the boat is right there, easy to check on. Other than hauling the boat out and transporting it to your house and then picking it up in the spring and putting it back in the water, you have very little cost. And except for covering the boat, you're going to have some sort of cover to put over the boat. So that's probably the cheapest on-land storage method. And also, you're not going to have any restrictions on working on the boat because it's in your yard. The only issue there is finding someone to take the boat to your yard. Not everybody will do it, depending on where you live. And some places, if you're in a homeowners association, they may not want you to have a boat sitting in your yard. But those aren't very common here on Mount Desert Island. Now the other on-land storage is to have your boat stored in a boat yard. In a boat yard, you are going to have two options. Outside storage, the boat covered somehow, probably by shrink wrap, because boat yards don't really like tarps since they can blow off in the winter and potentially damage other boats. So that's an added cost, shrink wrap. Shrink wrap generally isn't reused, so it's kind of an environmental issue too, because you got a big sheet of heavy plastic. For a boat like Tortuga, probably 20 by 40 feet, that is thrown away every year. And then there's inside storage. You don't want inside heated storage. Heated storage will basically shrink all the wood up on your boat, open up all the seams. It's hard on your fasteners and on the planks and frames. And you'll have to rehydrate in the boat in the spring, which is also hard on the fasteners and planks and seams. So don't want to be inside in heated storage. What you want to be, if you're inside stored, is in cold storage, preferably over a dirt floor, so you have more moisture. And the boat will stay wetter and will not dry out as much. It will dry out some. It'll dry out some if it's out of the water, even in your yard. So that's how you want to store it. So what are the limitations with going to a yard? Well, one big factor might be, does the yard let you work on the boat? A lot of yards will not let you work on the boat. You're going to have to pay them to do the work, and that can be very expensive. For example, last year I put about 150 hours of labor into Tortuga. At yard rates, that could cost, as much as $10,000 or $15,000. Big chunk of money. So if you're fortunate, you might be able to find one of the few yards that will let you work on the boat. They're usually going to have fairly stringent conditions that you're going to have to meet. But, if they'll let you do it, you're going to save a lot of money because you don't have to hire somebody to do it. You can hire them to do it, but you don't have to. Well, what are the costs for the different options? If you're going to store in the water and you have your own mooring, could cost you basically nothing extra because you already have the mooring. If it's in good shape, you just hang the boat on it, and that's that. You will, however, have to have a place to keep your dinghy so that you can get out to the boat. And that is going to cost you a few $100s around here to keep your dinghy at one of the few docks that stays in the water. Alternatively, if you have a little trailer for your dinghy, you could launch your dinghy every time you want to go out to the boat and check on it. And that's kind of a hassle. So, could cost you basically nothing except for costs associated with keeping your dinghy someplace to keep your boat on a mooring. What about staying in a marina? Well, that's going to cost you a little more. Here, at this marina, they charge somewhere between $150 and $200 a month to store your boat here for the winter. So that's probably going to run you in the neighborhood of $900 to $1,200. But you don't need a dinghy to check the boat. You can just walk down to it. It's easy to check it. And I think if you're going to winter store, that's probably better than leaving it on a mooring, because in particular this marina has a breakwater, so it's protected from the worst waves, and it's relatively sheltered here right up at the end of the harbor, so it's protected from the worst of the wind. You can potentially have issues if they do have a storm and it does get a little bit rough in here and it's really windy. You can have some pretty significant loads on your mooring cleats, and it's possible that you could have one yanked out of your boat, or you could break a mooring line. So, that could happen, and that can be hard on the boat. But it's not as tough on the boat as keeping the boat on a mooring, where it's going to have to ride out storms and could potentially get really beat up and even, as I mentioned, come off the mooring. The other factor for in the water storage is the boat is exposed to the elements. Around here we get a lot of freeze-thaw in the winter. That means that we're going to have water on the boat that's going to freeze and then thaw and then refreeze and then thaw, etc. And that can open up seams that the water can get into and cause significant damage over the course of the winter. There's also snow. Here we get somewhere between about 30 inches and 100 inches of snow every year. Ideally, you'd like to get that snow off of your boat, which means coming down and shoveling snow off of your boat. And if your boat's on a mooring, it means clearing the snow out of your dinghy, breaking the ice out of your dinghy, rowing or motoring out to your boat, and then getting aboard and clearing the snow off. Kind of an unpleasant task. But those are the downsides of in the water storage. On the plus side, if you stay in the water, the hull stays hydrated. You don't have any issues with the hull drying out, and it's actually good for the hull to stay in the water, unless the water freezes and you have ice. Ice can do a lot of damage to a wooden hull fairly quickly. Fortunately, here on Mount Desert Island, we don't get ice that often. I've seen ice in the harbor here in Southwest Harbor maybe 10 times in the last 20 years. So it's usually pretty benign here in terms of ice, largely because of the tidal range and the fact that when it's windy it can get pretty choppy in here, and wind and waves aren't conducive to forming sheet ice. Okay, what about storage on land? Well, if you're going to store at home, all you have to do is haul out and get your boat trucked home, put some kind of cover on it, and then get the boat picked up and launched in the spring. That's probably here going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 round trip, plus whatever your covering costs are. If you buy a tarp, you're probably looking at $100 for a tarp and tie-down line, and whatever framing you put the tarp over. So, you might be able to store your boat at home for $600 a year, which is pretty reasonable, and you'll have no restrictions on what you can do to the boat. And it's right there, so you can check on it anytime you want. If you're in a yard, I'm not going to talk about costs if you're in a yard that doesn't allow DIY, because that depends on what you need to have done to the boat. And it can be really bad, or it could be not so bad from year to year. But the base costs are going to be some sort of storage fee. Storage costs here on MDI run between about $30 a foot for the winter up to about $80 a foot. So for a 32-foot boat like Tortuga, that would be $960 up to about $2,500 for outside storage fee. Then you have to cover the boat. As I mentioned earlier, most yards are going to say, well, you got to shrink wrap it. Or we have to shrink wrap it. And that typically is going to cost you $400 to $500. So the base cost for outside storage is probably going to be somewhere in the $1,400 to $3,000 range for a wooden power boat like Tortuga. Plus your haul and launch, which the yard I deal with is $200 each way. So say $1,800 to about $3,500, depending on where you go. If you go to a yard with a travel lift, haul and launch is more expensive. Potentially as much as $300 or $400 each way. So that can be, considerably more expensive than storing in a marina, and a lot more expensive than storing at home or on a mooring. And the final way of storing, as I mentioned, is inside cold storage. You're going to have about, say for my marina, $400 for haul and launch. The inside cold storage charge is about $1,800. So, but I don't need to cover the boat. So, roughly $2,200 for the season. It's not that much more than outside storage when you factor in the cost of shrink wrap. Of course, some yards could charge you a lot more, say $125 a foot for inside storage. And for this boat, $3,200 to about $3,800 for inside storage. And the expensive yards tend to use a travel lift, so we might be looking at $600 to $700 round trip on the travel lift. So it could be as much as $3,800 to $4,500 for inside cold storage. And the expensive yards also tend to be the yards that won't let you work on the boat and have the highest hourly rates. So you could end up, if you have much at all done on the boat, spending $10,000 or even $15,000 for winter storage. For me, the boat is hauled and launched and put into inside storage. I do all my own work. So my winter storage cost for Tortuga comes to about $2,200, which is not that bad. More than here at the marina, where I'd end up paying about $1,200, and certainly more than I'd pay if I took it home, which would be about $500, or kept it on the mooring, which would probably be about $200 or $300 to rent a place for the dinghy for the winter. But I think it's worth it to have the boat out of the weather, so I don't have to worry about my finishes deteriorating. I don't have to worry about the boat getting wet and having water on the deck freeze. I don't have to shovel snow off the boat. I don't have to put a cover on the boat. So, it's a trade-off. Anyway, that sad day is approaching. So sometime in the next 2 weeks, I've got to get the engine ready for haul out, do oil change the transmission fluid. I've got to winterize my water system in my head, and a few other things. But other than that, I can use the boat weather permitting. Now, I'm hoping to go out tomorrow afternoon. Tuesday, probably not. We have a hurricane that's passing close by. It's going to miss Maine, but it looks like it's going to hit Nova Scotia. And we are going to get some swells from it. It could be pretty lumpy out there. I think the forecasts I've seen say anywhere from 8 to 13 foot seas. So that's a little choppy for Tortuga. So Tortuga will definitely stay here in the marina on Tuesday. But after that, who knows? Maybe we'll get a couple nice days and get a little boating in before I have to start putting systems down for the winter. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't, please subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to click that notification bell to find out when my next exciting video is posted. Thanks for watching.